You have been waiting for a reason to continue living. Maybe not consciously and maybe not outwardly or as a declared position, but instead underneath in the way that you move in life every single day, the way you move through your days and the half commitments to things or the admittal that you are not ready to actually continue. It's the held back efforts and it's the living life at 70% while the other 30% just waits to be unlocked or is hidden behind conditions that you continue to wait to arrive. Underneath all of that, there is one person who has decided quietly and without fully admitting to it, has told themselves that full commitment requires a guarantee that the world has not yet provided to them. That conditions are coming that the world has not provided to them yet, but once those conditions arrive, they will start committing and they will start being who they really want to be. They are looking for a reason, they are looking for a sign, they are looking for evidence, some sort of evidence that is worth giving everything to and giving all of 100% to a life that has not yet proven that it deserves it to them. Camus looked at that position and he called it what it was. He called it waiting for a reason that will never come. In his likely most popular work, being The Myth of Sisyphus, which was published in 1942, yet somehow still holds up to this day, Albert Camus opened with the only question that he considered philosophically serious at all. Why not suicide? Not as some sort of provocation, not as anything to get you to actually kill yourself, not nihilistically, right? But instead as precision. He decided that if life had no inherent meaning and if the universe was silent in response to every single human demand for purpose or for justice or for explanation or for any sort of reason, then what exactly is the justification for continuing or to continue living even? If the reason you were waiting for was never going to come, it was never coming, is never on the way at all, what will you do with the waiting in the meantime? As Camus observed, most people answer this question without ever asking themselves the actual question. What they do is they fill the silence with a habit, they fill the silence with distractions or with noise or with borrowed beliefs or with any sort of assumption that the meaning is on its way and it's somewhere ahead and that it will eventually arrive to them when the conditions get better or when they actually feel ready for it. They live, as Camus put it, by evasion. They keep the question at such a comfortable distance that it never actually has to be fully faced for them to start living their life. What Camus did and what made him such a genius but also made him crazy and what made him so influential nowadays was face the question directly. And his answer was not any sort of consolidation, but instead it was revolt against the world. The absurd for Albert Camus was not a feeling. Instead, it was a collision. And it was a collision between the human need for meaning, being the deep and the persistent and the entirely human demand to make a life that makes sense for them, and that effort must be rewarded for them, and that suffering must point towards something, and it was faced head-on against the world's complete indifference to that demand itself. The world does not answer, and it never will answer to you. And the absurd is the very thing that lives in the gap between the asking and the silence that the world provides to you. Most philosophical responses to this collapse to that gap somehow. Eventually, they realize that that gap is the very thing keeping them locked. Religion fills it with God, and nihilism fills it with nothing and calls it honesty. Existentialism of the Sartrean reality or the Sartrean variant fills it with self-created meaning. Each philosophy has its own response to that gap. But what Camus did, which was different from the rest of them, was refuse all of it. What he said was to keep the gap open. He said, do not fill that gap. Do not substitute anything in for that gap. Do not resolve the tension by any means or by reaching for something that makes the tension easier. Live inside the collision with the full awareness, the very idea, the very acceptance of what that gap actually is, and from that inside you then must revolt. Not revolt in sort of rage, not revolt in a traditional revolutionary sense, not as political action or as ideological opposites or philosophical contradictions, but instead revolt as the daily, deliberate, completely unjustified decision to live fully every single day anyway, to bring everything to a life that offers no guarantee in return, and to say yes, not because the universe is telling you to say yes, or not because the universe has earned the respect from you for you to say yes to it, but because the alternative of that is a half life spent waiting all the time for a permission that is structurally impossible to actually attain. Meursault, in Albert Camus' The Stranger, is condemned to death, and he arrives in his final hours at something that may look like peace to some people around him, but is harder than peace to accept. He opens up and he tells himself what he calls the gentle indifference of the world, or he accepts that gentle indifference of the world. He doesn't accept it in the resigned sense. It's not like he submits himself to accepting it, but instead he recognizes it and he understands that it does exist. The world is indifferent. He is alive. And both of those things are true simultaneously. Not one of them has to contradict the other. And the only honest response or recognition to that simultaneity is to live without asking the indifference to be anything else. It's to live without telling the indifference of the world to be different than what it is. It's a bit paradoxical, right? But that is Camus' yes. That is Camus' acceptance of the world. That is not optimism. That is not faith. That is not a comfortable belief that things will eventually work out, or that your effort will eventually be rewarded, or that the universe is secretly on your side. All it is just the quiet revolt of a person who has looked directly at the silence, directly at the void, and decided to be fully alive in spite of it. Now that I'm saying these things, I kind of realize how different Camus' perspective is to Soren Kierkegaard's, or maybe even similar in a sense. I think I want to make a video on that. Let me know if you'd be interested in a video paralleling between Kierkegaard and Camus' idea of this void. However, beyond the rant, I think biggest issue nowadays is that most people are waiting for you are waiting for a reason to live. The resignation that you have actually been living inside your entire life, that held back commitment, that 70% life that I mentioned before, with the 30% locked behind some sort of acceptance. It is the patience for conditions that will never actually arrive, or they keep not arriving. And if you notice the trends, you'll eventually realize that they just don't arrive. As much as they elude you to believe that they do, they just don't. And that is not a conclusion that you have reached. None of those factors, none of those things that I just mentioned is a finite ending to what you have to believe in. But instead, it's just a choice that you keep making. And again, if you look at the trends, there's no reason for you to continue making that choice. Every single day in the space where full commitment would have been, you continue to choose not full commitment. It just sounds stupid, right? Albert Camus did not wait. That is what made him so great. That's what made his writing one of the most influential novels, or made him one of the most influential writers. He looked at that silence. He looked at that void. He looked at the gap that he mentioned so profoundly, and he understood it completely and said yes anyway. But the only way he understood it completely and finally came to the resolution to say yes is by looking at it in the first place. So many people will just avoid it intentionally. And the only reason he did was not because the world deserved it. It's not because the universe deserved Camus to say yes to it. But instead, it's just because he did say yes to it. The very absurd fact that he said yes to a life that promises nothing to him is the very absurd fact that made his life worth living. The question now is whether you are willing to do the same thing, because if you don't, your life will continue on the exact same path that it is right now. It's whether or not you're still waiting for something that's going to answer, or whether you're ready to look into the void and understand that the absurd meaning of life is just to live it.